Hi everybody, welcome to lesson number 9 of developing a dynamic website from start to finish. In the last video we worked on the database, just kind of talked about the database in general, how to make a quick SketchUp of a table, and now we're ready to go ahead and actually create that table, create the database, create the table, and get things ready to be implemented into the website. There's a couple of different tools out there that can help us do this. Most popular, I would say, would be Php Myadmin, which is something that is usually standard on a hosting account, and that is the case for our free hosting. And keeping our website open here in one tab, open up another tab, and put in your domain name or the location to wherever you're testing this, and type in /cpanel. And this should work for everybody that's using our hosting. If you have issue with this, let us know. If it's regarding our hosting, if it's your own hosting, do some research in their documentation and see if you can figure out why. But in our case, we want to go to cpanel. So we hit enter, and it's going to give us a login, and you're going to want to put in your own info. Okay, so we're in, and my login or my control panel may look a little different than yours, but ignore that. Everything else should be the same. What we're interested in here is the databases area here, and we want to go ahead and click on MySQL databases. Now mine's going to look a little different too because I already have databases in here. So ignore that as much as possible. The first thing we want to do is we want to create a new database. And we can call this whatever we want. The one thing you need to keep in mind is that whatever is sitting here before it is going to be part of the name. So you're going to need to remember that. In my case, it's study underscore. It's usually the username underscore and then whatever. So we're just going to call ours dynamic for this series. So that's the name of our database, study underscore dynamic. And you can name yours whatever you want. Normally, if I was making a website, I would just call it main, like study underscore main or something like that. So let's click create. It's going to take you to another screen that says it was created. Go back. And then now you see we have that database. Now what we need to do is we need a username. Now you don't need to do this every time you make a database. You can use the same username, but in this case we need a username. Let's just I usually make one called dev. And the same applies with this that did with the database name. The username is always going to be username underscore and then whatever you pick. So study underscore dev is what we're going to use. You can use whatever you want, your name or whatever, and then put in a password and make sure you remember that password. And then click create user, and then go back. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to associate this user with the database. And what that means is you can have as many users on here as you want. You can have as many databases as you want. You can create several different users for the same database. Depends on who you want to be able to have access to the database and what privileges, which is you're going to see here in a second. So we want to put user study underscore dev or whatever you chose, and we want to associate it with the dynamic database or whatever you named it. So we click add, and then this next screen, it's going to ask us what privileges we want to give it. In this case, we're going to say all. And usually you only give all privileges to a development account, and you change that later on. But for the moment, we're going to want all privileges. We want to be able to do everything that's possible. You say make changes, and you're good to go. Now, if you wanted to later on down the road give access to another developer or somebody else, you could create a new username, associate it with that database, just like we did, only instead of clicking all privileges, you could go through and handpick which privileges they are allowed to have. So that's why that's there. So now we have a database, we have a user, and we have a user associated with that database. And if you've watched our Intro to Web Databases, you should already know this and what's coming up next. And what's next is we want to go home. So click up here and go home. We want to scroll down, and we're going to use Php Myadmin, which is in the databases section, and it's going to open up in a new tab, hopefully, or a new window, depending on your setup. And here's the interface. All right, it used to be a really ugly interface. It's still not the most attractive interface, but they're cleaning it up. One thing I like to do before I get started is go to More Settings, click on Features, and I want to turn off Ajax. You don't have to do this, but you'll notice, and click Save, you'll notice that they've added a feature that allows for this kind of Ajax-y pop-up window whenever you want to add a new table or things like that, and it actually becomes kind of a pain. It's neat looking, but it's a pain, and if you forget to uncheck that box, you'll see what I mean, and you don't have to do that. You can work within it if you want. But now that we've done that, let's click back here. Let's click on Databases. It's going to list our databases, and we want the database that we created, study_dynamic, or whatever you called it, and it'll say no tables in the database. That's because there aren't any tables. I took a screenshot, or a picture of the whiteboard, granted a pretty crappy picture with my cell phone, but this is from the video we watched before. And first thing we need to know, if you look at what it's asking us here when we want to create a new table, is the name and then how many columns or how many fields. And if you look at our picture, we have 6 fields. So we're going to call this, because we called it pages, let's call it pages. And everything's case sensitive, so I try to do everything lowercase. And also, a good thing to do is decide up front if you're going to do things in like a plural fashion or a singular fashion. When I first started, I would have called this table page. Now I do pages, and I tend to stick with that throughout everything. Pages, entries, blogs, whatever. I try to keep everything plural that should be plural, and I just stick with that. It's just good to keep a naming convention. So if we tab over to where it's asking for number of columns, remember we have 6 of them, and we'll say go. And this next screen has a lot of options. Now, we're actually not going to worry about a whole bunch of them, and I'm not going to explain all of them yet. And again, if you've already watched our Intro to Web Databases, you might already know where to go from here. But let's go through, and we're going to create the field names, or the columns that go into this table. And if we flip back over here, just kind of take a look. I like to do them in the order that I listed them, even though they're in columns, but you'll see what I mean. So the first one is going to be ID, is the name, and the second one is going to be type. If we flip back to remember here, so the next one is going to be name. Next one is title. Next one is body. And the last one is status. So now, once you get used to doing these things, you might actually create one, or do all the settings for one, and then move on to the next. I'm just doing this way so we can, I don't know, I feel it's easier for you to understand. So we put in all the names. Now let's give these things properties here. The ID. I'm going to make an integer. I want it to be a unique number, and I want it to be able to be a large number if necessary. And we could either say integer here as the type, and then put in a value for how many characters, basically. So if I put in 2, that means it can only go up to 99. So only 99 records could be in there. What I do is generally go down here to this predefined medium integer, which I can't remember. I believe it's 9, but I could be wrong. But I believe it gives it 9 characters. So that's a pretty large number, and odds are we're not going to have that many pages. So that covers us there. Now we want to move on. We leave this empty since this is a predefined amount. If you did just choose int for integer, then you would put in the number. Default, we're going to leave empty. Collation, leave the same. Attributes, the same. Index, it's important. This is the primary key, and we've talked about this already. So we want this to be the primary key or primary index. And AI stands for auto increment. We want this checked. And what this does is saves us a lot of hassle. Every time a new page is added, it will automatically give it a new ID, and it's going to give it the next one in the series. If the last page created was page number 1, then it already knows that this next one's going to be page number 2. If the last one was page number 23, it knows that this one's going to be 24, and so on. So that's very handy. So moving down to type. Type, like I had mentioned before, is usually going to be the ID of another table in the database, or a record from another table in the database. So we're going to go ahead and just call this a medium int 2. And this one, the only thing we need to do here is choose index as the index. We just want to make sure we call this an index, and we'll explain that along, later on down the road. Now if we want to, we can make a default, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So let's click as defined and 1. I'm doing this just because I have foresight into what we might be doing. This could absolutely mean nothing if we don't end up having page types. But just in case we do, let's just go ahead and default every page to a type 1. Now let's go to name. Name, remember, is just a reference for us. So it doesn't need to be that many characters, but what we want to choose instead of integer is this varchar is how I say it. Some people say it varchar, var something variable character. I don't even remember what it stands for, but we're going to call it varchar. So we're going to choose that, and this requires a value, and I'm going to say 150. That's enough. I don't think the name of the page should be longer than 150 characters. And we do not need a default. We do not need anything else. That's the end of that. Title is going to be pretty much the same as above. It's going to be a varchar, except I want to give a little more room because this title is going to be what's displayed, and it might be a little more creative, like welcome to our blog, whereas the name of the record is going to be blog, but the title might be welcome to our blog. So let's just give a little more room here, and let's say maybe 300, and we can always change this later, but this is the limit. Now body is a little different. Body is going to be the body of the page, the content, and there could be a lot of content here, or there could be little. And so we're not going to use the varchar data type this time. We're going to use a predefined amount called long text. And again, like the medium int, I don't remember how many characters this allows, but let's just say it's a lot. It's enough to definitely cover whatever information you're going to be putting in there. Tons of HTML, whatever we want to put in. And since it's predefined, we don't need to put a length or value in there, and we can leave all this as is. Status, the very last one here, let's keep it as an int, and let's give it a length of 1 character, because like I told you before, I usually make this a boolean, as 1 or a 0. However, sometimes I stray from that, and make an exception, and maybe there's a 1, 2, 3 status, or like a third status or a fourth status. It usually never goes above 9, so I don't need to have 2 characters. But that's why I choose to make it an integer in 1 rather than choosing the actual Boolean data type, which is available. So we're done here. So let's go ahead, and this is important here to look at what you're doing here. We want to click save. We don't want to hit go, because go is going to say we want to add another column. This is in case you accidentally typed in 5 and you really meant you wanted to add 6 columns, so I want to add 1 more column, go. We don't want that. Just hit save and you're done. Now we have a pages table in the database. It does not have any records, so all we can really see is the structure of it. We can't browse it. So the next step would be filling it with data. So let's just create 1 record here, and you guys can do the rest, at least for now. But let's go ahead and open up content here, and let's just go with home. Let's open up the home.php, and here's our HTML. Let's copy all of our HTML. Do not copy this PHP tag up here. So if yours looks just like mine, it's going to be line 3 to line 13. If not, just make sure you get all the HTML, none of the PHP. And let's just copy this, Control C if you want to use a shortcut, and then come back over here to Php Myadmin, and all we have to do is simply click on Insert here, and see it automatically gave it a type 1. Leave ID empty because it's going to automatically create that for us. It's going to put the next ID number or next number in the series in there. For name, let's just call it home. For the title, we're going to call it welcome to our site. And then for the body, we're going to paste Control V, and we're going to paste all that HTML in there. And for status, let's go ahead and from now on we're going to make the status 1 is going to mean that it's live. Say go. And then one thing that's neat about Php Myadmin is that it always shows you what it did. The actual SQL involved in doing what we just did, and that is right here. And it will tell you that this was successful. It did enter a row. So now we can browse and see that we have 1 record, and it is for the home page. And if we wanted to, we can edit it, come in here and change some things if we wanted. Either way, we have that in. Now we can go in and do the same for all the other pages. I'm going to go ahead and put in records for each one of our pages, just the way we did. You can be creative here with the title, because we have 4 pages here: the home, gallery, blog, contact us. Now for the name, my recommendation, just to keep things simple, is make the name whatever we did up here in page. Whatever we called page equals what, call it that, make that the name. So page equals gallery. Then when you're making the gallery page, make that the name. And then the title can be whatever you want. Welcome to my gallery, gallery page, etc. So that wraps up this lesson. I know this was a quick one, but when we come back to the next one, I'm going to be assuming that you have already put in all the records. And let's just do one more, just in case everybody isn't clear. And let's say insert. This is a new record, and I'll show you here. Notice Php Myadmin automatically gives you an option to add a second record if you wanted to. So you really could put 2 in at the same time here, and we might as well. Now, one thing we do know is that we've kept the same generic web text for the body of every page. So that should still be kept in the clipboard if we haven't changed anything. So that comes in handy. So the next page, and let's just do it in the order we've already made them. It doesn't matter, but let's do that anyway. So the next page would be the gallery. So the name, gallery, title, my gallery, or whatever you want to call it. For the body, if you still have all that text in the clipboard, simply Control V, and status equals 1. Now let's go ahead and take advantage of the fact that they give us the opportunity to add another record. Let's go ahead, and the next one is blog. So let's call this blog, and we'll call this my blog, or whatever you want. And again, Control V if you have that in your clipboard. Status is equal to 1. Now we could have made status have an automatic default, and a lot of times I do that. That's up to you. Now let's go ahead and hit go, and everything was a success. Shows you everything that happened here as far as the SQL involved in doing this, which is a great way to learn. Let's go back to browse. Shows that we have these records, and now that we've already done 3 out of the 4, it makes no sense for me to stop now. I might as well sit here with you and do the last one. So let's click insert, and if I remember right, it's contact. Yes, contact us, and the name we gave it was contact. So give the name contact. I'm going to give it a title of contact us. Control V to paste the body. Status of 1 because we want it to be live. Again, that is a number and thing that we are making up ourselves. And that'll make sense later on down the road. Hit go. Do not start typing down here because it's going to assume you're putting in another record. Just hit go in there. Now if we click over here on pages, you can see we have all of our pages stored in the database. So when we come back and do our next lesson, we will implement this. We will learn how to connect our site to the database and then retrieve these records. And that's where, that's where the fun begins if this is your cup of tea. Otherwise, this is probably pretty boring, and it's going to get even more boring. But if you're really into this, this is where things start clicking, when you start realizing, oh, this is how I do that. And you might start getting some ideas already in your head about how you can take advantage of the database. So we'll see you next time in the next lesson.